early on you mentioned there's the kind of independent left, and then there's the sort of left that we associate with the Communist Party, with the ANC and Kusatu. Can you explain, because the NUNSA conundrum, apart from the corruption, it also exposed like this problem, which is you start these new political movements, but you underestimate the hold of the ANC, the SACP. Well, that's the SACP, but I suppose the ANC is the leader of that, and Kusatu, over people's imaginations on the left. So regular people voting for the ANC and seeing the ANC as that model. Secondly, maybe as related to that, that space that NUMSA didn't take then gets taken by the EFF. I'm curious from you, like, one, what do you make of the ANC's still electoral dominance? Because we cannot pretend that that's not happening. When it comes to elections, you said SRWP could barely get some votes, so the ANC did well. And then there's this other force that some people did, and I know people who joined it and assumed that that's going to be this new left party, which was the EFF. What are your views about what their projects are?
So I think those are great points, Sean, and I think the first thing you say is something that we on the so-called independent left need to just keep reminding of ourselves, because I think we were just too, facile in our analysis of that. I think we started believing long ago that because the ANC was guilty of what we thought of as a betrayal, because it instituted a neoliberal regime when there were conditions for doing something a lot different, that would mean very quickly that workers would wake up to this betrayal, that they would that would immediately mean that we can operate as though the ANC is in a process of decline. But the problem is that just has not been the case. The hegemony that the ANC wields over workers in South Africa is phenomenal. The degree of party loyalty, the cursile strength of party loyalty with the ANC is incredible. And to be honest, we should have done better to have looked at the historical record on these things, to have been more sensitive for what that meant and how difficult that was going to make our political challenge. Because it's not entirely unique, the degree of loyalty that the ANC commands over workers, even whilst essentially screwing them over in material terms. There are numerous other historical settings in which socialists have faced a similar conundrum to this, of trying to dislodge workers from a political party that commands immense loyalty but that is not serving their interests. And I don't think we were ever sensitive enough to that. And I think it's part of the. And in fact, this one has fed into a lot of the worst tendencies within movementism, because one of the problems with movementism was that we saw all of these new social movements that emerged as anti-ANC vehicles. And this was encouraged by a lot of their intellectual, gatekeepers, that they were portraying them as vehicles in which anybody involved in this movement, because they had the benefit of having this personal engagement in this process of struggle, they immediately saw through the contradictions, not just of capitalism, but of the ANC. And so this was the seedbed of a new party emerging outside of the ANC, but it was just never the case. And it was the problem fundamentally, I think, is one of the reasons why these movements turned out to be so weak, is that they never managed to challenge the loyalty that most of their own members even had, let alone the community that they operated in, towards the ANC. And it set them up for co-optation and demobilization and all the sorts of games that the ANC was able to play with them. So I don't think we've ever taken seriously what it really meant to confront the deep loyalty that the working class in South Africa has to the ANC. And so one of the other things that it led to was we never sought out the potential avenues that we had to try and build coalitions with whatever left factions existed within the ANC. We were the independent left. We were the ones with the right pure socialist agenda. And eventually the workers would see that and they would leave the ANC on their own terms. And that was a mistake. And so it's one of the things that we have to do entirely differently moving forward, is we have to constantly be trying to build connections with, reach out to, left within the ANC, and we have to understand that the only way we really advance is when there's a decomposition of that coalition, when workers finally do break with the ANC. And we have to take also seriously that there are going to be some committed socialists that actually realize this in a way that we didn't realize, and that therefore understood that it made sense in a certain way to be trying to work within the ANC, to try and build the left with the ANC, and we should see these people as natural allies.
To ask a question related to that very quickly, if you don't mind me, it's a question that Shireen Hassim, who's a friend of the show and has appeared before, she asks if we can define the left, because she says SACB hasn't been on the left for a long time. We're talking that there are some factions in these formations which are still on the left. And there's another question to bring back something Sean was mentioning earlier about whether or not the economic freedom fighters is on the left. So, I mean, it might be helpful, especially in South African political discourse, where I think that a lot of these terms have become muddied and the political spectrum scrambled to understand what does it mean to be on the left at this conjuncture.
Yeah, and I guess that's a complicated question when it comes to South Africa, because, you know, often when we're trying to place a particular political formation on a political spectrum, we have to deal with the common disjuncture that exists between the ostensible ideology of these movements and their objective character. So you take the EFF, for example. The ostensible ideology is clearly a left-wing one. It's Marxist phenomenalism, whatever, changes by the week. It's clearly shifted in a much more overtly nationalist direction, but I think it's still fair to say that it's mostly an ideology whose reference points are left-wing. But objectively, is this a left-wing movement? Then also that, you know, then that becomes, it depends, what exactly do you mean? If this was if you mean by what would the EFF achieve if it came to power, then no. Because again, it's anti-democratic and it's corrupt and it's led by people who are, you know, embedded in this state party machine, tenderpreneurs, people who live off the state. And so if it came to power, what would it do? It would enrich those people, and I don't think it would benefit workers. So objectively, it's not left. But then on the other hand, what's the composition of the party? Well, it's organizing a whole bunch of working class people of the broad working class on the basis of a left-wing ideology. And that surely is not irrelevant to how we characterize this movement. And there's a lot of people who say, well, the EFF is middle class. That's rubbish. As far as I can see, its support base is more or less the same class composition as the ANC. It's large chunk of unemployed people, small chunk of formerly workers, but mostly very low income working class people who are in the EFF. So, I mean, that's I don't think it's a straightforward answer to the question. I guess it depends on your usage over here. I'm in favor in a lot of these debates in a lot of, you know, what we're discussing now in adopting a more inclusive terminology, precisely because I think that we can't afford to write these movements off in the same way that we can't afford to write the SSCP off as not being part of the left. In fact, all of what I was just saying about the strategic error that we've made for so long on the independent left of not recognizing the necessity of having to try to cultivate and work with left currents within the alliance comes from that tendency to not see the SSCP as left. Why? Because it's in a alliance with a bourgeois party, and so objectively it's bourgeois. But it's mobilizing and organizing a whole bunch of people on the basis of a Marxist ideology. How can we not see this as left? And so this is why I'm a little bit wary of some of these efforts, and in the most extreme form, they come from some people on the left who want to tell you that the EFF is fascist. Well, what's the strategic upshot of calling it fascist? Fascists are people that we fight with on the street with bricks and bats. Are we suggesting that's what we should do with the EFF? Absolutely not. I think we need to try to connect with the base of the EFF and try to understand that, you know, the leadership might be doing its own thing, but most of the people who are in the EFF are there because they think this party is going to transform society in the way that progressives say it ought to be transformed. And we just need to convince them that this is not the organizational vehicle to do that, but we're on the same side, ultimately.